one of the big discussions that any city or town wants to talk about. Now, we've talked about this from various angles. We've taken a look at the private sector's solutions. We've taken a look at the government solutions. But perhaps the most important persons to talk to, if you remember when we had Dr. Lawrence Esho, excuse me, from the Technical University, he said that urban planning must be centered around people. It's not about concrete. It is not about buildings. It is not about urban plans, but it is centered around the people. And that is what we're doing today. We will be speaking to the people and asking them what they feel the solutions are towards upgrading these informal settlements and having everybody live in a position of dignity. We're asking you today, and the whole idea of today's show is to seek solutions together. The question today on Sunrise Live is, what is the solution to upgrading slums in Kenya? Keep your comments coming in. I can already see them on our SMS feed. That's 8040. Leave us your name and your location. Also on Twitter, that's at KTN Kenya. Keep your tweets coming in. Remember, the hashtag we're using is Sunrise Live. What is the solution to upgrading our slums in Kenya? Well, my guests today probably do have some ideas on just how to best resolve this issue, and I'm joined this morning by Ibrahim Amba, who's the chair of the Community Rights Forum of Kibra, and Ismail Ramadan, also from the same organizations, of course, all residents of Kibera, and today giving us solutions on that. Thank you so much for making the time to come with us and discuss this issue. Let's start with you, Bwana Chairman. When all of these discussions are had about upgrading slums, upgrading this, and urban planning, do you feel that the persons who actually reside in these areas are adequately involved in these decisions?
Yvonne, unfortunately not. You know, when you are bringing anything new to people, it is very, very important that these people are properly informed. What happens is, you get government officials coming to a meeting. They come and give all sorts of stories. You want to do this, you want to do this, you want to do this, how do you want it? And you at the ground, you have to look up and say, my God, what is it that they're talking about? To do it properly it is important that you bring these things and start talking about it in an informed manner, so that this person down there understands exactly what you're talking about. A case in point, Yvonne, the ministry did a lot of good things. They came to Kibera, they planned, they finished planning, and offered two solutions. One, the Nubians were to be given some 300 acres to be theirs, or their homeland, as they demanded. 400 acres of the 700 goes to slum upgrading. But when the officials come, they start talking about PDP, they started talking about the jargons that a person down there doesn't understand. And that is the crunch of the matter. And when you do not understand and bring such questions to fore, what do they say? You do not agree, or you disagree among yourselves. But the core of the matter is, people are not properly informed. They have to come down to the level of these people, explain to them exactly what is it they wanted, so that this person understands, yes, 300 acres, give us. Then, the terms are A, B, C, D. And this person can connect. If that was done, I don't think there would have been any argument with our community on this issue.
Okay, all right. And just to let you know that we did not want to speak about the issues of persons in Kibra or Kibera, or, you know, indeed talk about these slums without getting a feel of what they look like. So we did make a point of sending our cameras out yesterday to be able to get a view of what it looks like. Because sometimes, you know, we can speak here in the studio and say, this is what life is like in Kibera, and we're not getting the true feel of it. So in the course of our discussions this morning, you are going to be seeing footage that we took yesterday afternoon from the area of Kibera for you to have a better understanding of just what we are speaking about, so that we can bring this conversation into great perspective. Now, anytime we talk about Kibera, we must not forget to talk about the Nubian community, Ismail, that claim that Kibera is their ancestral land, and this is where they were born and brought up, and any discussion that must be had must factor in the Nubian community. Ismail, you can tell us about the community, the origins of the Nubians in Kibera, for us to have a better understanding of this before we start saying, oh, who are the Nubians? And they are a minority, but nonetheless an important community in the country. Tell us about the history of the Nubians and Kibera and how those two go hand in hand.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Earlier on you asked about who the people are, who should be consulted when any development plan is being drawn up. Now, in Kibera, the question is, who is the right person to be consulted? People tend to forget the history of Kibera, and they look at Kibera as it is now. Of course, if you look at it as it is now, then you come to the conclusion that Kibera is actually the microcosm of Kenya, because you have everybody there. But if you look at the history of Kibera, it started way back in the late 19th century, in fact 1870s or thereabouts. Now, Kibera was initially a jungle. That's where the name Kibera came from. It's a Nubian name. From the jungle, the original people who were in Kibera were scattered across about 4,200 acres of land. The border of that land was going as far, the southern part is what you now consider to be the Langata Road. On the eastern side, you have Mbagathi Way. On the northern side, you have Woodley Estate, and on the western side, you had Jamhuri Park, bordering Kibera. So all area within that was what was called Kibera, 4,200 acres of that.
Okay.
When the Nubians settled there in Kibera, they settled and created some 13 villages, and they gave them their own names. Some of those names exist up to now. A few of them have been changed over time. Now, if you look at it in terms of governance, British government was involved in Kibera. In fact, they are the primary people who brought the Nubians into Kibera up to 1963, by the time we got independence. The way of life in Kibera during that period was different from the way of life that followed between 1963 and say now. Now, the growth in population in Kibera is an interesting thing. Prior to independence, the ratio of the Nubians to non-Nubians was 2 to 1. For every 3 people, 2 of them were Nubians. 1 was non-Nubian. 10 years into independence, towards the end of the 1970s, that ratio changed 2 to 1, but in reverse. For every 3 people, 1 would be a Nubian, 2 would be non-Nubian.
Okay, meaning there was migration of persons into Kibera.
Into Kibera.
All right, okay.
Now, as things stand now, we are told that the ratio is now about 17 to 1. For every 1 Nubian, there are 17 other Kenyans.
So is this then why you feel not involved in the discussions around urban planning, in the discussions around upgrade of Kibera?
Looking at these statistics, you would see that in terms of representation, if we talk of majority representation in any given situation, you can see that the Nubians are really in the minority right now. So the question is, are they represented in the governance of this country? And if not, why not? And if they should be represented, how should that happen? And that's a big question. And that representation translates itself in the way the Ministry of Lands came into Kibra on this question of Nubian village development. Who should be consulted? We think, as Nubians, that we should be consulted in the first place before anybody else. And all along this period we've been talking about, the question of security of tenure has been a thorny issue. And because of lack of that, we, the Nubians, feel that we have been marginalized. We have not been able to develop as much as other Kenyans, in the sense that, as you know, land is a factor of production. It is a source of wealth. You could pledge your piece of land if you had the title to get a loan and therefore develop. But in the absence of that, you are then left to your own designs. And this is the situation we find ourselves in. We feel marginalized in Kibera. We do not have enough voice to be represented in the governance structure of this country, by virtue of the fact that we don't have enough people to vote for our own representative.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about then the discussions around urban planning and upgrading the lives. Of course, upgrading housing then upgrades a lot more. Your lives, your livelihood, the dignity in which you find yourselves living in. And you mentioned the fact that you are not included in those discussions, and you had talked about the fact that you'd like to be given some land, and then the rest is also shared by those who are also living in Kibera. What then is the problem when it comes to implementation? You'd asked for the 300 acres, you did not receive that?
No, Yvonne. All governments from Beberu, when they left here in 1963, the land was given to our grandfathers. Our grandfathers demised, our fathers took over. We were born, our fathers were born there, then us, third generation. Fourth generation is our children. Fifth generation is now our grandchildren. What has stopped administration of this country to just issue title deeds? Misconception is there. People believe that one day the Nubians walked across the Nairobi and found an empty land somewhere and decided to grab it and settle themselves. No. The British government planned, allocated every family a portion of land. And interestingly, we wrote a journal explaining that, particularly when the government formed TJRC, because we think that that's an historical injustice. If Beberus could not give us title deeds, first, Kenya Free Government didn't give us. Moi didn't give us. Kibaki is finishing his term now. He could not give us. What is the core problem that stopped them from giving us?
To what level have you been able to engage with these successive administrations to say, look, here we are and this is what we're asking for? And what has been the response with the Kenyatta administration, with the Moi administration, with the Kibaki administration? What have your attempts been like?
Yvonne, that's an interesting question, and I think it's the right one. And with all these successive regimes, we have made some presentations. In 1963, our elders wrote a memorandum to the then Prime Minister of Britain, and there's documentary evidence to that effect, Harold Macmillan. And there was a copy to Jomo Kenyatta and Ronald Ngala, who were then the ministers of state for treasury and also administration, respectively. That was the first attempt by them just prior to independence in January of that year, before we got our independence in December. There was no response. There was nothing tangible done to that effect. During the Moi regime, there have been representations done on the same issue. Also through our current, outgoing MP, who happens to be the Prime Minister of this country. We had several sessions with the Prime Minister, involving at one point when Kimunya was the Minister for Lands, at another time when the Prime Minister became the Prime Minister in his office. And in fact, that plan, the Nubian village plan, came about through discussions with the Prime Minister and the then PC for Nairobi, Maina. And interestingly enough, Yvonne, you might want to know, that's when the Nubians got involvement in that respect. Now, to the extent that the community actually made financial contribution towards the demarcation of the land for that purpose. That is what gave rise to the plan that was being discussed last week by the Director of Physical Planning and the PS.
Right.
So there was some involvement, not only involvement in terms of discussions, but even financial contribution by the community towards the realization of that particular plan.
Okay,
Yeah.
so are you happy now with that plan, or are there still some challenges or some issues that you are not happy with?
Yeah, we said that it was initially 4,200 acres, and here we are only talking about 300 acres, right? A bird in hand is worth two in the bush. So if we are able to be given that with a proviso that the balance from the 4,200 acres would be compensated somehow, either through another piece of land elsewhere. But what we are saying is we are actually asking for 4,200 acres. Granted, maybe the situations have changed over time, and all that can be given to us is 300 at the moment. Fine.
Okay.
But the demand is for the whole amount.
All right, okay. You were going to say something, Chair, and I was just going to pick up on that. If that is not possible, obviously the situation now with when the previous generations came and were living in Kibera is different. Perhaps 4,200 acres may not be available to you at the moment. Are you willing to then say, okay, the 300 acres we've been given is fine and you can live with that?
Exactly. As Ismail said, the land is 4,200 acres. Presently, as we speak, that has been taken, Gay, Woodley, whatnot, all these estates, and the rest of it. What remains now on the ground is 700 acres. On these discussions, it was seen the Nubians cannot be given all the 700 and leave the other Kenyans out. So offer was given to us for 300. The other 400 is for slab upgrading, which will cater for all our brothers of the other community.
Right.
And we said, give us this 300. A bird in hand is better than two in the
Okay. All right. So this has already been agreed to in principle between yourselves and the Ministry of Lands.
Right.
So with that, are you happy?
Now, from the discussion of last week with Augustine Masinde, I was surprised to hear that him saying that I mean the whole process is on hold. It's being suspended because there had been so many objections what we're wondering is, what were those objections? Because at the time they put up the advert in the Kenya Gazette, that was in August last year, it was indicated that for every objection you had to give specific reason.
Right.
And that reason has got to be evaluated and to be found whether it's reasonable or not.
Okay, so are you then sensing mischief here? Or, you know, what feeling do you get now that, you know, the Director of Physical Planning says this is on hold due to objections that were raised? What are your thoughts on that then?
Exactly.
What do you think that's happening there?
Just as anybody else would think, we are hoodwinked.
What would you say to the allegations that the Nubian community is holding the others at hostage, and fine, okay, you are the original inhabitants of Kibra, amounting to 4,200 acres, and there would be some who say you stand in the way of the slum upgrading project in Kibera because, you know, you are saying this is our land and we are holding on to it. What would your reaction be to that?
It's wrong. What a nonsense. Because we welcomed all the other communities in Kenya in Kibera. Would we be so naive as to say we do not want the others?
In fact, there's evidence to that effect, Yvonne. Back in 1953, there was the Carter Land Commission report. In fact, that was the start of what they called upgrading of housing in the urban centers, particularly in Nairobi. And that was meant to actually modernize Kibra. But what in effect happened was that the upgrading did not take place continuously to cover the whole land.
Okay.
It was happening in bits and pieces, with intervening periods ranging between 5 to 10 years. And that is why you will find that Salama Estate, for instance, was put up in 1961. You find Ayani Estate was put up in 1977, and so on. And in the meantime, the migration into Kibra continued. Now, for instance, in July of 1969, when Tom Mboya was assassinated, there was ethnic tension within Nairobi, and the members of the Luo community could not find peace or solace anywhere in Nairobi other than in Kibra. So that was the first, if you like to call, migration into Kibra in a large number through political problems, right? So we welcome them. We had been coexisting with the neighboring Kikuyus from Dagoretti and Kiambu for many years, since the beginning of Kibra. Obviously, they were our neighbors. So we have coexisted. And even when the estates were being built, the allocation criteria favored non-Nubians. I can give you a specific example of Ayani Estate. Ayani Estate was built between 1977 and 1980. Before that, the community living in that place was about 200. They put up units, 550 units at Ayani Estate, after evicting the previous residents of that place.
Right.
When the estate was completed and it was ready for allocation, the eligibility criteria was put up so high in terms of financial term.
Okay.
But at the end of it, only 34 out of the 200 initial residents got accommodation at Ayani Estate.
Okay.
What happened to the rest of it? And this had been the trend every time there was upgrading. Every time there was upgrading. And the people who ended up marginalized have been the Nubians.
Okay, so problems with the allocation of that. And you recently went to court, or members of the Nubian community went to court to block the upgrading of Kibera and, making of infrastructure, claiming that your rights have been denied and you've been disenfranchised in the country. Some would take issue with that, some would not. But give us perhaps the idea or the reasoning behind now choosing this method to say, to make your grievances known.
You see, in the absence of clear-cut policy as to what can be done to us, what other way to redress this? It was not the issue of trying to stop development, but give us our 300 acres first, so that we know who gets what. We reallocate it to the community. And then if the development is to be done to the other part, who would deny? Who would stop it? Now, even in the 300 acres that we accepted, we are still disadvantaged, because just imagine the amount of acreage that the infrastructure will take.
But then infrastructure is important.
It is.
Is it not?
It is.
What would your solution be?
We still agreed. We still agreed to take it.
Yeah, you see, Yvonne, last week, when you were talking to Koske, you had an interesting exchanges there on matters of absentee landlords, the tenants, in relation to slum upgrading. That sent some kind of signal to us that we are yet going to suffer again. Now, when
How
you say,
why would you say that?
When you say, it appeared like the tenant had more rights than the owners of the properties, and you were actually referring to absentee landlords. The Nubians have never been absentee landlords. They have always been there, all along. That is their ancestral land. They have always been there, and if they rented anything, they were always there. The question of absentee landlords is very interesting, because most of the absentee landlords are actually ex-members of provincial administration, the DCs, the chiefs, the PCs, and their relatives and their business partners.
Okay, and these are allegations that you can prove?
Oh,
yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay, all right.
It's actually there in that journal.
Okay, all right. Let's understand then who are the landowners in Kibra besides the Nubians, because by saying that you're worried, it would be by perhaps assuming that Nubians own the whole of Kibera. Would you say that Nubians occupy all of Kibera?
They used to.
They don't anymore.
They don't anymore,
okay,
through the machinations of the provincial
administration.
Okay, understood. So for the other areas in which the Nubians do not occupy, who are the landowners? Do you know?
You see, at the time of independence, out of the 4,200 acres we were talking about, a homestead had an average of about 5 acres or so. A homestead of every Nubian. We used to get our food from our own farms, from the land. We used to own livestock within Kibra.
Allow me to interject, Ismail. That was then, and it made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You were on 5 acres and using it for agricultural land, but we're slowly moving towards urbanization,
Yes.
industrialization, and that means that land in the capital city, as it were, happens to be Nairobi,
Yes.
unfortunately, which
Yes.
is where,
Yes.
the land that you're talking about exists.
Yes.
Then things have changed and times have changed.
Of course.
Right, and you're not able to occupy that amount of
That's
land.
true.
Right. So then with that going forward,
Yes.
we can always talk about the land that was there and was taken.
Yes.
But what's the way forward? Because obviously now we cannot have, well, we can, but as the situation stands now, like you
Yeah.
mentioned, there's Ngei, there's Ayani, and there's all these areas,
Right.
which we cannot change that now.
We cannot.
Okay.
We cannot, Yvonne. Obviously,
And,
we are realistic
Right.
in the sense that we cannot change it, but You know, I was looking at the papers the other day, and one comment was that it was being estimated that the value of land in Kibra as it stands now is about 60 billion. Just imagine if somebody had the title for that. If we had the 300 acres, I'm talking about now, I'm not talking about the past. If we had the 300 acres now, right, for whatever it's worth, we could pledge that so that we could do some development for ourselves.
Okay, all right. And that brings me to a tweet that has been sent in by Reverend Harrison Koske. You're talking about the 300 acres that you will get, and you could leverage that to do your own development. However, slum upgrading isn't necessarily your responsibility. It would be the responsibility of the government.
Yes.
Okay, and that's what Reverend Koske says here on Twitter. He says, thought upgrading is done by the government. How is it you doing it now? When you say we want our 300 acres, perhaps, allow me to speculate, but perhaps it's a statement like that that gets everybody worrying, that we want our 300, leave the 400 for the others, and you can upgrade that for everybody else, but we'll be here and we'll upgrade it, and we'll leverage on the land, and we will get our loans, and we will build our houses. Do you not want the government to upgrade your 300 acres as well?
No, on the contrary. But if, for example, Amber's family is allocated 1 acre of the 300, that is mine. If the government want to come and help me develop that, why should I refuse?
Okay.
Because Yvonne, there is something
issue
very
with that
interesting
statement. Okay.
We were talking about the development of the other estates.
Yes.
Ismail said in Ayani, 560 units were put up. The Nubians got 43. Huh?
34.
Now, the slum upgrading, as we saw the first phase, is a 4-5-storied building. Amber's family is allocated the 3rd floor.
Right.
A suite in the 3rd floor. Where is my land?
Do you accept that in Kenya today, that owning land itself may not necessarily be the solution to that? Because that is what they were also putting forward, saying that there is heavy pressure on land due to increasing population.
Right.
As you yourselves have seen, you had 4,200 acres. It is no longer available to you, at least not that great amount of land. And what they were saying is proper utilization of land, where we don't have enough land to have acreage and acreage for the population in the area. But let's have 1 acre. On that 1 acre, we go upwards rather than horizontal. And as important as land is, are you willing to perhaps grapple with the idea that if you do not get land on which you can till, but at least you have some decent housing? Because I think that is the big question.
Yes.
But on a piece of land. Where is Nubian's land?
The question is here.
Yvonne, all the 42 communities of Kenya have a piece of land somewhere called their own.
Not necessarily.
Right.
Not necessarily. I don't own a piece of land anywhere, not even ancestral.
No. I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about communities.
Okay.
Every community, if you go to Kakamega, you expect there is a community there called Luhya. So, where is the Nubian land? And because of that marginalization, we never end to the Nubians. We are a minority. We are marginalized. We are segregated. And why? Because we do not have anywhere. There are some communities in Kenya who doesn't know that there is a Nubian community anywhere.
Right.
Because of land.
Okay, I'll allow you, Ismail.
Let me just make a point.
Right.
In our current constitution, I think it's chapter 2, section 56, is talking about minority and marginalized community. If you go to chapter 5, section 63, it's talking about community land. Right? So chapter 2, section 56 talks about affirmative action to ensure that the minorities and marginalized are catered for, including ensuring that their cultures are preserved. The Nubians are a community. They have culture, they have language that they want to preserve. And logically, Yvonne, you could only do that if you are homogeneous in a particular area where you could actually be able to practice your cultures. Otherwise, if you are scattered all over the place, how do you preserve it? It is there in the Constitution. How do we go forward?
All right, okay. So moving forward from that, and let's just put it into perspective, there was the Nubian project that you mentioned, in which you were promised this 300 acres, until you had the Director of Physical Planning who came here and said that that has been put on hold. Yeah. Was there any formal communication to you?
Yes.
Were you informed of that, or did you hear about it on Sunrise?
We had it on Sunrise.
Okay.
And that is what generated this.
Okay.
The Act has got a provision that if there's any objection, they should write back to those people who have either raised objection to tell them why their objection or whatever was being so there has not been any communication from my point of view, from what we know so far, feedback as to why this thing was on hold. We just had it, and that's in fact one of the things that prompted us to get in touch with you, so that we could put up.
So if you get the 300 acres of land, you would then be willing for the slum upgrading project to carry on?
Well, it does not have to take
but
the
you are
form.
with the court case.
But it doesn't have to take the form of slum upgrading. I mean, Koske was talking about PPP, I don't know, private-public partnerships.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And if you really want to consult the people, you would ask them how they would want to do it. Right? And then between you and them, you can consult and decide the way forward.
All right, so
I'm sure there must be some other options.
Okay, so let me understand. Of course, there's the issue of getting your land. And even with that, you are not opposed to the slum upgrading project?
We are not.
Okay, but you have issues with
We have
allocation,
issues
with how it's
allocation,
done?
yes.
Okay.
Go about it.
Right, okay. So what would be the best way forward? Sitting here talking about this, what would you say are the things that need to be done for the upgrading project to carry on?
Yeah.
Because like you say, it's not just about the Nubians, it's about all the other communities that are living in Kibera. Yes.
Yeah.
So what needs to happen to break the deadlock?
I think they need to quickly issue that community land title. And we talk of community land title in the sense that if we were to give individuals those titles, they will be bought off by the rich people. So for the interest of the community, and because of the requirement of the Constitution, the provisions in the Constitution that a community has to exist, then it makes sense to give the community land title, so that community can be able to decide how to move on. That should be the priority.
All right. Once you're given that land, will you then allow the government to come in and say we want to upgrade this Nubian community land? Is that an option
that's
on the
option.
table?
That's an option. It's open for discussion.
Okay. All right. So this is not something you would be against. All right. So you've talked about getting the community land title. What next? Are you willing for some Nubians perhaps, and let me just put this out there, perhaps, who say, okay, there's community land, but I want to go out there. Of course, Nubians are marrying people from other communities, and they're living within the wider Kibera area. What happens to everybody else? What would your solution be to the upgrading project in terms of making it fair and equitable for everybody?
Yvonne, we have always had relationship with other people. The fact that we are asking for recognition in terms of being given title does not mean that we have no relationship with other people. It's not like, the misconception is that we are trying to create a kind of Nubian enclave, a kind of Nubian nationalism. Far from it. That's not it. After all, we have coexisted with everybody all along, and there's a lot to prove in that respect. So I don't know whether there should be any fear that we are trying to isolate ourselves from, or to kind of isolate ourselves from everybody else. No, far from it.
All right.
Just as
Chairman?
it is, just as it is, members of our communities, for that fear, and because they are able, have bought land elsewhere and are settled everywhere in Kenya.
Okay.
We have no problem on mixing with other people. In fact, we invited all the other communities to come and live with us, and we lived in peace. From all that time, imagine Nairobi coming into being, Kibera was there. And from that time, have you ever had any commotion with anybody in Kibera? Except for
Right.
sometimes in
1995 and the year 2001.
And 2001. And that one has its reason, because it was instigated, politically instigated. But otherwise, we have been peaceful with every other.
Okay, all right. So just to recap that, getting the community land, and then what else? Let's talk about the wider Kibera area and all the other communities that are living there. Why do they feel so disenfranchised when we see all of these upgrading projects? What is it that they feel is unfair about those projects that sometimes then, makes them tell the government, no, we do not want you to come in and upgrade the project? Of course, there's the issue of now when you move them from the informal structures that they have to something more structured, it'll definitely cost more.
It will cost more.
Okay, so let's talk about those wider, the other communities and the challenges they
something
face.
very interesting. That our community opted for a community title, community land title, CTL. Why? Because if it's given to individuals, it will be bought off. Similarly, a lot of apprehension is there. Move me from my shanty, put me in that lovely flat there. I cannot afford it. I will get off, possibly put a tenant there, and still go and make another carton house out there. We will be replicating the problem rather than solving it.
So what would the solution be then? Because we obviously want everybody to live in proper housing structures, but like you say, and I think this is no secret, the persons who live in shanties and who live in these informal structures made of wood and plastic obviously cannot afford better.
Yeah.
But we're putting them in something that will cost more, naturally.
Right.
So there's a disconnect there.
Yes.
What then is the long-term solution towards upgrading the slums and the lives and the dignity of these people? If we put them in a structure they cannot afford, obviously they will relinquish that and go back to the shanty. So what would a wholesome sort of approach be?
You see, Yvonne, there has been some mitigating factors against that. There was a time, I think it was in the year 2000, in discussions.
First place is because they cannot afford to live in Kileleshwa.
Yeah.
But if we sort of say, and not to put this simplistically, if we say we're taking Kileleshwa, we're taking Gara, we're taking, name any other, Kilimani, and we're taking it there because we want to upgrade their lives, but they've not gone to those regions because they cannot afford that. So are we just shooting ourselves in the foot and going round and round in terms of upgrading their lives?
Ismail said here, the situation must be arrested somehow, somewhere. Give the Nubians their 300 acres. That problem is solved from that point on. Huh?
Well, is it?
Yes.
Probably not for the other communities living in Kibera.
No, I'm coming to that.
Okay.
That is what, part one.
All right.
Give the Nubians 300 acres. That problem of shanty developing has stopped in that particular area, right? In the other area, put some cheap, decent houses that these people, much as they would like, they couldn't afford, would be able to sustain themselves. Give them with better terms. condition.
Okay.
If there are 1,000 and 1,000 houses are built, they are taken in, and then you put a mark, no more.
Okay.
We will stop it.
You see,
All
because
right.
of the
Okay.
forces of
Problem is the forces, political forces, that make it worse. I want my votes who are for me. I will have to bring in here, and this will be replicated every year. We
Okay.
we have so many candidates,
In
for
fact,
instance, in
yes,
Kibera,
yes.
and if each candidate bring 100 people to ask to vote, this one will remain perennial problem for Kenya until doomsday.
All right, okay. And this falls squarely in the Prime Minister's constituency,
Yeah.
in Langata constituency.
Mm.
Your thoughts on that? And he's been member of parliament for quite some time now in Langata. Any efforts to sort of maintain that? Because the seats aren't too many. We've got the councillors before, now we go into a new election and a new dispensation. We've had councillors and members of parliament. So you're talking about politicians shipping in people from upcountry and outside of Kibra for the purpose of votes. All of this is happening. Does the Prime Minister know about it? Have you brought this to his attention? Is he one of the persons that is bringing in voters? I like that reaction, Amber, because I would like the response to that.
What I can say is this: I think he's been lucky, and he has capitalized on that situation as a politician, of course, because we referred to the influx of people after the assassination of Tom Mboya. That was the first serious influx of certain members of communities into Kibra, and the situation has not changed, has not been reversed. In fact, more and more people have come, and you can't blame a politician from capitalizing on the availability of people who can easily support him. So you really cannot blame him for that. Now, whether he is behind such a migration, I don't know. I don't know, and I can't.
But
But
certainly
what
he
I-
must
but-
notice.
but what I
Certainly there is one would notice when your constituency keeps growing. Every time we have a census, every time we have the number of registered voters, surely it must pique somebody's interest. During the last 5 years, there was X number of registered voters. Now the number has grown even more. Of course, there could be other reasons for why there's an influx. Someone would hypothesize. But what are your thoughts on your member of parliament in terms of trying to resolve this issue?
This is what I wanted to say. We are very proud people to have Right Honorable Raila Odinga as our member of parliament for the last 20 years. When in the Mseto government, our member became the Prime Minister, all of us were so relieved, and we were so happy and expectant that at last Kibera problem will be over. We are looking with apprehension and at a loss as to why it did not materialize. Because we have been with our member for the last 20 years, through opposition, when he was member of opposition, until now he is in the government, and that one itself would have endeared him in Kenya, and people would have voted him in, as we are going to election, he would have gone in unopposed because he uplifted his constituency to the top. Why it did not happen is a mystery that we are so sad about.
Would the Nubian community be supporting him?
Why not?
No,
we are
But
members of the community.
you've mentioned the fact that you are at a loss as to why he has not been able to help you in the last 20 years. Is he the man you would now support? Obviously, he's not running for Member of Parliament for Langata
He's
anymore. But for 20 years he's been your Member of Parliament, and you are now expressing your dissatisfaction with the fact that now as a Prime Minister, and the Ministry of Lands, I might add, was within the ODM docket, a man who falls under the Prime Minister. So just a quick one.
No.
Still being disappointed with the fact that he's been unable to resolve this, will you be supporting him for the presidency?
You see, Yvonne, I do not want to draw our community into that.
Can you give us your personal then?
Voting is an individual decision. And I'm not going to tell you who I'm going to go to vote for.
Absolutely not. It's your
I cannot
fundamental
commit my
right.
community here to vote for Raila or to vote for Uhuru or to vote for Musalia. They are free to vote for whoever they want.
Do you feel any of these parties are addressing the issue of land, addressing the issue of minorities, of which the Nubians are? Because there's other communities, there's the Korea community, there's lots of other communities who have the same issues that you have.
I'm glad looking at the manifestos of the various parties, I have seen mention of Kibera. And in some of the talk shows, I have heard politicians talk about the Nubians. That gives me some comfort.
Okay.
But I
They're
hope
at
it
least
will
talking about
translate.
you?
Yeah, that at least we are talking about it.
All right. Okay. Not willing to commit yourselves here as to whether you will support this man. But you are disappointed, no doubt about
we
that.
we are not happy. We are not much disappointed, but not happy. You know, when perennial problem like that, somebody who saves it is a real hero. Imagine, British government could not solve it. Kenyatta government could not solve it. Moi's government could not solve it. Kibaki's government could not solve it. If he single-handedly solved it, he would have been the hero.
All right, okay. Very quickly, in closing, the National Land Commission has now finally been gazetted after the president being pushed to do so. Do you have any strategy to engage the National Land Commission in terms of helping you solve the crisis? Let's start with you, Ismail, as we close.
Yeah, I think we have enough documentation on our efforts towards wanting the title. So we will definitely engage the Land Commission using all the previous documents that we have been able to generate through consultations with the authorities, and take it up from there. And using the Constitution, as I mentioned here, those sections of the Constitution,
Allowing community land.
then we would want to pursue that.
Okay,
yes.
all right.
Yeah.
Chairman, let's find out with you.
Together with
on the
that,
final comments, yes.
together with what this man said, we also hope that the initial person we sent our grievances to, that is TJRC's report, would mention us favorably, adding whatever their recommendation to the new Land Commission. I think by God's grace, Kibera issue will be solved.
Okay, thank you both for coming in to have this discussion. I'm glad it's something that we started in mind long term, and of course speaking to various stakeholders in the issue to try and see how we can best resolve it. Remember, our question of the day carries on. We are still seeking solutions. And by the way, I appreciate all the tweets that are coming in, which by the way we have been running, and they are running at the bottom of the screen regarding this issue. But today we are seeking solutions. So we can ask all the questions, but today we are asking you to give us your suggestions on how best to address this issue of informal settlements in this country, how we can upgrade the lives of these who are Kenyans just like you and I, in terms of upgrading their form of living and their dignity, because certainly living in the conditions that you have seen on your screen isn't exactly the best thing. So let's keep on giving our solutions for our question of the day. I can see some great feedback from our viewers abroad as well as here in Kenya as well. Remember, as Kenyans, we are all responsible for one another. The Nubians have given their say on what it is that they want, and we thank them so much for their presence here and looking at some of the issues that are facing the people living in Kibera and indeed perhaps other slums. Like I told you, it's not as simple as we may think. There's a lot of dynamics in these communities. So keep your comments coming in on Twitter at KTN Kenya, and also on our SMS line, which is 8040, asking the best way to go forward in terms of upgrading the slums. We will carry on with your feedback right up till the end of the show. And something else I might want to add, while we're in Kibera yesterday, we did speak to various residents there, and we will be sharing their views on matters of peace in the upcoming elections. That will come at the tail end of KTN Sunrise Live today. However, now we take a break. It's about 8 o'clock right now, and we want to take a short break. Come back. We're talking about entrepreneurship. Are you one? What is an entrepreneur? It's a nice word. It's bandied around a lot. Do you understand it? Are you one? Do you know if you're one or not? Keep it here. Washeke and Manga will be with us shortly. We'll be right back.